She felt his breath against her lips and whispered the words before her mind could stop them. Don't stop. Seojin's hand went still against her jaw, his thumb lifting her chin just enough that she had no choice but to look at him. He didn't rush, he didn't push, he just waited, and somehow that patience was more dangerous than anything else about him. Amara's chest ached from the weight of wanting something she had no business wanting. She could feel the heat radiating off his body, even though the only place he touched her was her face. Just his hand, just those eyes, dark and steady and devastating. Say it again, he murmured. Her pulse crashed against her ribs. She knew she shouldn't. She was a widow. He was a man who moved through shadows like he owned them. But God, she was so tired of being careful. Please. Her voice broke on the single word. Don't stop. Something shifted behind his eyes, something possessive and tender that had no right existing in the same gaze. He leaned in slowly, lips hovering just above hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth but not the touch. And for the first time in 3 years, Amara stopped running from what she wanted. But we need to go back, because none of this started with a kiss. It started with a dead man in an alley, a flower left on a doorstep, and a secret so ugly it should have destroyed everything. And if you want to understand how a widow ends up falling for the man responsible for her husband's death, you need to understand what loneliness does to a person when grief has been eating at them for 3 years straight. If you're new here, welcome to City of Tales. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications because this is the kind of story you do not want to walk into halfway through. 3 days before that almost kiss, Amara was barely functioning. The anniversary of Darius's death did this to her every single year, hollowed her out, turned her into something that moved through rooms without really occupying them. She hadn't left her apartment since Monday. Groceries could wait, phone calls could wait, everything could wait until she remembered how to be a human being again. But just past midnight, voices rose from the alley below her building, low and controlled and wrong in a way she felt before she understood it. The restaurant had been closed for hours. No one should have been down there. Grief had made her reckless. That was the only explanation for why she stepped onto the fire escape, instead of pulling her blinds closed and pretending she heard nothing. He was standing in the center of the alley surrounded by 3 men, and he looked unbothered in a way that should have been impossible. His posture was loose, almost relaxed, like he was waiting for the other men to remember they were making a mistake. One of them lunged first. What happened next lasted maybe 3 seconds. The man hit the ground before Amara could process what she was watching. The second came from the side and caught an elbow to the ribs that folded him in half. The third tried to run and didn't get far enough to matter. Amara's breath locked somewhere in her throat. She should have ducked back inside, should have called someone. But she couldn't move because when the alley went quiet and the man in the center looked up, his eyes found hers immediately. Like he already knew she was there. Like he'd been aware of her the entire time. He didn't flinch, didn't run, just held her gaze for a long, suspended moment and then disappeared into the dark like smoke. She stood on that fire escape gripping the railing long after he was gone, heart hammering with something that wasn't fear. Something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Something that felt dangerously close to being awake. The orchid appeared on her doorstep the next morning. White, fresh, expensive, sitting in a simple glass vase with no note and no explanation. Her hands shook when she picked it up. He had been here while she slept, standing at her door. She should have dialed the police. And every sensible part of her knew that. Instead, she carried the orchid inside and set it on her kitchen table. And that's when she looked out the window and saw him standing across the street beneath a streetlight, watching her building. This time he didn't disappear. Amara told herself she would not go looking for him. She told herself that twice more on Tuesday morning before she found herself pushing through the door of the coffee shop on the corner. The one she'd been avoiding for months. because Darius used to take her there on Sunday mornings. She needed ordinary. She needed to feel like a person who did regular things. She got 3 steps inside and froze. He was in the back corner, alone, scrolling through his phone like he belonged inside her life. Their eyes met, and his mouth curved. Small, careful, like he'd been hoping she'd show up. "Sit," he said softly. Everything in her said walk back out that door. Her legs carried her to his table anyway. "You live above the dry cleaner on Birch," he said. "Not a question. You left a flower at my door." Also not a question. He nodded once, watching her face with an attention that made her feel exposed. "Did you like it?" "I haven't decided yet." Something moved behind his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or respect. "I'm Jay." "Amara, I know." Her stomach tightened. "How?" He leaned back in his chair, relaxed but never quite still. "You want coffee? The lattes here aren't worth it, but the drip is decent." She should have left. She heard herself say drip is fine. He ordered without standing up. Just a quiet gesture toward the counter that the barista responded to immediately. Amara noticed. She noticed everything about him she shouldn't have been noticing. They talked. Carefully at first, the way people do when they're circling something they're not ready to name. The neighborhood, the weather, the bookstore 2 blocks down where she used to work before Darius died. He didn't offer her that look people gave her when the subject of her husband came up, that waited careful pity that made her feel like a problem to be handled. He just listened and responded like she was a person, not a tragedy. She hadn't known how starved she was for that until it was happening. She laughed at something dry he said about city traffic and felt guilty immediately after. 3 days past the anniversary of her husband's death, laughing in a coffee shop with a dangerous stranger. What kind of widow was she? "What do you do?" she asked. "You're needing the conversation to land somewhere real." Jay's expression didn't shift. "I protect things." "What kind of things?" "Things people can't afford to lose." It was deliberately vague, and the smart move was to push, to demand something concrete. But a part of her didn't want to. Part of her wanted to keep sitting in this corner with the bad drip coffee and pretend he was just a man. She stayed 20 minutes more than she planned. When she finally stood to leave, a man walked in off the street, tall, broad, expensive jacket. He made it 2 steps inside, saw Jay, and went completely still. Real fear moved through him. Visible, immediate. Jay didn't even look up. The man backed out without ordering. Amara's heart hammered as she stepped onto the sidewalk. That night, she stared at her phone for almost 10 minutes before typing, "Should I be scared of you?" The reply came instantly. "Probably, but I hope you won't be." She typed back, "Why?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Because I'd like to buy you coffee tomorrow." She went back. She told herself it was the last time. But when Jay looked up from his book and smiled that small, genuine smile that did something to her chest, Amara understood she was already lying to herself. Twice a week became 3. 3 became 4. She learned small things. He drank his coffee black, no exceptions. He read dense history books about empires and warfare. He had a pale scar running from his thumb to his wrist on his left hand, and when she asked about it once, he simply smiled and moved the conversation somewhere else. She didn't push. He didn't ask about Darius. They lived inside this careful space where neither the past nor the future existed. Just coffee. Just 2 people, just the way she was slowly becoming herself again. One evening she was walking back from the grocery store when she saw him on the corner. 5 men in expensive suits stood around him in a loose circle, and they weren't talking. They were waiting. Then one by one they bowed. Not a casual nod. A real bow. The kind that meant something much larger than respect. Jay said something she couldn't hear and they scattered. Her stomach dropped. She ducked into a doorway before he could see her, pulse thudding in her ears. She'd known he was dangerous, but this was different. This was power. The kind that made grown men bow in public like it cost them nothing to do it. She went back the next morning anyway because she was already too deep to pretend otherwise. When he kissed her knuckles at the end of the visit, that old-fashioned gesture that made warmth bloom up her neck, she felt lighter walking home than she had in years. She was still gathering her coat when the woman appeared beside her table. Older, elegant, eyes that held something sad and urgent behind them. "Be careful," the woman said quietly, glancing toward the door Jay had just walked through. "Men like him don't release people. Once you're inside his world, leaving isn't something that happens." Amara started to respond, but the woman was already moving away. She didn't catch a name. She didn't catch anything except the words that followed her home and sat at the edge of every thought that night. Men like him don't release people. She should have been afraid enough to stop. Should have blocked his number and changed her routines and maybe her apartment if it came to that. But she dreamed of him that night. His hands, his voice, the particular way he looked at her like she was the only person in any room they'd ever shared. She woke up tangled in her sheets, heart pounding, body aching, and the realization that moved through her was the most terrifying thing she'd experienced since Darius died. She wasn't just drawn to Jay, she was falling hard, fast, and completely off the edge of anything she'd planned for herself. She texted him Thursday afternoon. "Want to come up? Too crowded at the shop today." It was a lie. The shop was empty, but the walls there felt too thin and she needed to understand what this thing was becoming without an audience. He replied in under a minute. "What's your apartment number?" 3B. "I'll be there in 10. She spent those 10 minutes straightening pillows that didn't need it and talking herself into and out of this no fewer than 4 times. When she opened the door and saw him standing in the hallway, that dark stillness he always carried, that controlled intensity that somehow never felt threatening when it was aimed at her, she understood her body already knew what her mind was still arguing about. The moment the door closed, the air inside the apartment changed weight. Jay stood in the middle of her living room with his hands in his pockets and looked at her like he was holding something back. "You should tell me to leave," he said quietly. Amara's breath caught. "Why?" "Because I don't want to." The space between them pulled tight. Oh, she should have created distance. Instead, she moved closer. "What if I don't want you to either?" His jaw tightened. He crossed to her in 2 slow, deliberate steps and lifted his hand to her face, just his palm against her cheek. His thumb brushed the corner of her mouth with a gentleness that felt impossible, coming from a man who'd dropped 3 people in a back alley without breaking his stride. Her eyes fell closed. 3 years. 3 years since anyone had touched her like she was something worth holding carefully. "Look at me," he whispered. She opened her eyes. His gaze was dark and barely controlled. "Tell me to stop." "No." His thumb traced her bottom lip, slow testing, waiting for her to change her answer. She didn't. This wasn't just want. It was need. Raw and aching and real. The kind that comes from being hollow for so long that the first warmth you find feels like salvation. Jay leaned in until she could feel his breath against her mouth, 1 inch from closing everything. And then he stopped. Not yet. Her eyes flew open. "What?" He stepped back, putting air between them. His chest rose and fell like the effort cost him something. "Not yet. Not until you know everything." "Know what?" His jaw worked. "Who I am. What I do. What being close to me costs people. I don't care. You will." Before she could push back, his phone cut through the room. He answered in Korean, fast and clipped, and she watched him change some more. The man who'd just been touching her face like she was something precious became something cold and contained and entirely other. He spoke for 30 seconds and hung up. "I have to go." His voice had gone flat. "Oh, final. Jay." But he was already at the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at her. "I'm sorry." And then he was gone. Amara stood alone in her living room with her cheeks still warm from his touch and her whole chest aching from an almost kiss that never arrived. Not until you know everything. What was he hiding? And why did it feel like knowing wouldn't change anything? 3 days passed with nothing. No calls, no texts, no corner table at the coffee shop. She told herself it was for the best, told herself this silence was the mercy she'd been too weak to create herself. She checked her phone every hour anyway. Saturday afternoon, a knock came at her door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She looked through the peephole. A man stood in the hall, tall, well-dressed, smiling with his mouth while his eyes held nothing at all. She opened the door to the chain length. "Can I help you?" He tilted his head. "You're Jay's distraction." "Amara, right?" Her blood went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." He reached inside his jacket and produced a folder, sliding it through the door gap. "Read this. Then decide if you still want him. Who are you? Someone who thinks you've earned the truth." He paused, turning away. "For what it's worth, I actually feel sorry for you." Then he was gone. The folder sat on her floor for a full minute before she touched it. She should have thrown it away, should have called Jay and demanded to know what was happening, but her hands were already reaching. She sat on the couch and opened it. Photos, documents, official letterheads. The first page was a dossier. Name Choi Jae-won. And age 34. Occupation, Executive Director of Pacific Trade Solutions. And underneath in red ink, Seattle Operations Leader, Beko Faction, Korean Organized Crime. Her stomach turned over. She kept reading. Money laundering through shipping logistics, arms trafficking disguised as security consulting, protection rackets, photos of Jay shaking hands with men whose names appeared in federal indictments, police reports with his name imperfectly redacted, each page worse than the one before it. And then she saw it. A newspaper clipping. 3 years old. Headline, "Innocent man killed in gang crossfire." She knew this story. She had lived inside this story every day since it happened. Her vision blurred as she turned to the next page. A police report. Victim: Darius Williams, age 31, financial analyst. Cause of death: a single gunshot wound to the chest. Collateral damage in targeted assassination. The folder slipped from her hands. Then she found the memo beneath it. Korean text with an English translation paper-clipped to the back. Dated 3 years ago. Subject: Sodo District Incident. Cleanup authorization. Authorized by Choi Jae-won. She couldn't breathe. Jay hadn't just known about Darius's death. He had ordered the operation. He was responsible for the bullet that took her husband. And then he had found her, watched her, made her coffee, made her laugh, made her feel alive for the first time in 3 years. She sat on that floor until the sun went down. Amara didn't sleep. She sat on her couch staring at the documents until her eyes burned and the words stopped forming meaning. Everything that had been building between her and Jay, every laugh, every careful touch, every moment she'd felt like a person instead of a widow, it was all scaffolded on blood. On her blood. On Darius. By Sunday morning, she couldn't hold it inside anymore. She grabbed her keys. She didn't know his address, but she knew where to find him. The coffee shop was nearly empty that early on a weekend. He was in the back corner. He looked up when she walked in, and the expression that moved across his face told her he already knew why she'd come. "Amara, don't you dare say my name like that." He stood slowly, carefully, like she was unstable. She threw the folder at his chest. Papers exploded across the floor. "Tell me it's not true." Jay looked down at the scattered pages. Then he looked at her. "I can't. You killed him." Her voice cracked wide open. "You killed Darius, yes." No denial, no explanation, just yes. Something in her chest broke clean through. "Why didn't you tell me?" She wasn't trying to keep her voice down anymore. "How could you just, after everything, how could you?" "I didn't know." His voice was quiet. "Not until I came to your apartment and saw his photo on the mantel." She froze. "What?" I saw his face and I recognized him. Jay's jaw worked. "The operation 3 years ago, I didn't know his name. Didn't know he had a wife. Not until I was standing in your living room looking at his picture. And you didn't say anything. I tried to stay away." His voice broke around the edges. "I swear to God I tried. Why couldn't you?" Because losing you felt like it would kill me faster than anyone else's bullet ever could. Amara stared at him, the man who murdered her husband and then made her fall in love with him. You don't get to love me, she said. Not after this. Jay nodded slowly. I know. Then why? But I do anyway. The confession hit her like something physical, and the grief she'd been holding for 3 days finally broke loose. She cried in ugly, violent waves, the kind she hadn't allowed herself since the night she got the phone call about Darius. She expected Jay to give her space, to stay back. He didn't. He crossed the room and pulled her in against his chest and held her while everything came apart. She hated that his arms felt like safety. Hated that his heartbeat steadied hers. Hated that even inside the worst truth she'd ever been handed, she didn't want him to let go. I hate you, she said into his shirt. I know I should leave. You should, but I can't. His arms tightened. Then don't. They stayed like that until the shaking stopped. Then she pulled back and looked up at him. Who was the man at my door? Jay's face went somewhere cold. Someone who wants me dead. Why did he come to me? Because he's figured out what you are to me. Amara's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means he'll use you to reach me. He's coming for me. Not a question, Jay didn't answer. He just pulled her back in, pressed his forehead to hers, and Amara understood with a terrible clarity that loving this man wasn't just painful. It might be fatal. She didn't go home with him that night. She walked out, drove home, didn't look back. For 7 days, she didn't answer, didn't open the door when he came, didn't read his messages. She tried to hate him the way the situation required, tried to grieve Darius the right way, cleanly, with appropriate outrage directed at the appropriate person. But forgetting Jay felt like forgetting oxygen. She turned every conversation over in her mind, looking for the lie, and couldn't find it. Everything he'd said, everything he'd done had been careful and real and costly to him. Had any of it been genuine, or was she simply the penance of a guilty man? The thought made her sick. On the 7th night, she ended up on her bathroom floor crying so hard she couldn't catch a breath. And the thing that finally surfaced through all of it was the thought that broke her completely. She wasn't crying because Jay had killed Darius. She was crying because she still wanted Jay, still wanted his voice and his steadiness, and the specific way he made her feel like a whole person. What kind of woman did that make her? She pulled a bag from her closet and started packing. Go. As she was going to leave before she did something she couldn't take back. She had a sweater halfway folded when she heard the glass break. Her hands went still, footsteps, more than one person moving through her apartment with controlled efficiency, low voices, Korean words she couldn't translate. She moved to the bedroom door and looked through the crack. 3 men in dark clothing tearing through her living room, pulling open drawers, checking cabinets. Find anything he gave her, burn it. Then, wait. Her blood went cold. They weren't robbers. They were here for her specifically. She backed toward the window. The fire escape. She could get to the street, get to someone. She hadn't made it 2 steps when the bedroom door slammed open. The man inside scanned the room, found her, and smiled. She ran for the window. He caught her arm before she cleared 3 feet and dragged her back. She fought, clawing and kicking with everything she had. He threw her onto the bed like she weighed nothing. The other 2 appeared in the doorway. Call him, the first man said. Tell him we have her. No, please, but the phone was already ringing on speaker. Jay picked up on the first ring and his voice came through like a blade. You touch her and there is nowhere on this earth you can go. Too late, the man said and pressed a gun against the side of her head. She heard the front door destroy itself from the inside before the sound fully registered. Wood and metal. And force. And then Jay came through the frame. What happened in the next 4 seconds was something she would spend weeks trying to process. The first man never got his weapon raised. Aunt Jay's hand hit his throat and he went down, choking. The second came from the left and came away with a shattered wrist and a scream. The third, the one holding Amara, tried to swing his gun around. Jay took it from him, turned him and put his head through the wall. Twice. The room went silent. Amara stood in the middle of it, shaking. One of the men on the floor wasn't moving. Blood spread beneath him. Jay had killed him with his hands and his face showed nothing. Then he looked at her and everything changed. His hands were shaking. "Did they hurt you?" His voice broke on the question. She shook her head. He covered the distance between them in 2 steps and pulled her in so tight she lost her breath. "I'm sorry." He was trembling, actually trembling. "I'm so sorry if I'd been 1 minute later. But you weren't." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his eyes searching and wild, and Amara saw something she had never seen in him before. Terror. Not for himself, for her. "We have to leave now." He grabbed her half-packed bag off the bed. "We can't stay here. Jay." But he was already moving, pulling her toward the door, stepping around the men on the floor with that mechanical efficiency that was both frightening and necessary. She should have demanded answers. Should have called the police. Her legs followed him anyway. They went down the stairs fast, his hand in hers the whole way. Outside, a black car was idling at the curb. He put her in the back and slid in beside her. The driver didn't ask a single question. Jay made a call in Korean, short and cutting, then switched to English. "Jay, it's handled." He looked at Amara. "We have a problem." A pause. "She's coming with me." A longer pause. "I don't care. Figure it out." He ended the call. Amara watched him, this man who had just killed someone in her bedroom and was now dictating terms to people she would never meet. She should have been demanding to be let out at the next traffic light. Instead, she leaned into his shoulder, pressed her face against him, and asked quietly, "Where are we going?" His arm came around her, his lips pressed against the top of her head. "Somewhere safe," he said, and for the first time in 7 days, she stopped fighting. They drove 40 minutes north, out of the city, until the highway gave way to a cliffside road, and the road gave way to a house that had no business being a hiding place. Glass and steel and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Puget Sound, like it was something to be appreciated rather than hidden beside. Amara stood in the living room with her arms around herself and stared at the water without seeing it. Everything felt constructed, like a stage set between disaster and disaster. 3 men had broken into her home tonight. One of them was dead. And she was standing in a beautiful house on a cliff with the man who had started all of it, the man she couldn't stop wanting. Jay watched her from across the room, waiting for her to fall apart or run or rage. "How long?" she finally asked. "As long as it takes. Until what?" "Until they stop seeing you as a way to reach me." She laughed. It came out hollow. "Will they?" His silence was the only honest answer. She couldn't sleep that night. She found Jay on this balcony well past midnight, hands on the railing staring at the black water below. She stood beside him and they stayed quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said without looking at her, "for everything. I should hate you." "You should." "I know. I should have run the first time I saw you in that alley." "Yes, but I didn't." He finally turned to look at her. His eyes were haunted in a way she hadn't seen before. "Why?" She let a breath go. "Maybe grief broke something in me. Maybe I don't know how to want careful things anymore." His hand lifted toward her face and stopped just short of touching her, like he'd lost the right, and he knew it. "There's something else you need to know," he said. Amara's stomach clenched. She'd had enough new information to last her a decade. "Tell me." His jaw tightened. Darius wasn't a random target. He wasn't innocent bystander collateral. Amara went very still. "What?" He worked for a front company that moved money for a Chinese syndicate operating out of Tacoma. Jay's voice was level, clinical, and absolutely brutal. He was laundering funds. He got greedy, started skimming. When he threatened to go to the FBI, they put out the order. "You're lying." His eyes said he wasn't. He was a financial analyst. I know what his resume said. Jay turned to face her fully. I also know what his bank records said. She gripped the railing. "Show me." They went inside. Jay pulled a laptop from a drawer she hadn't noticed and opened files that had no business being accessible to a private citizen. Account transactions, wire transfers. Her husband's name appearing over and over in amounts that made no sense for the salary he'd supposedly earned. Photos. Darius in restaurants with men who appeared in federal databases, in parking garages, stepping into cars she had never seen parked anywhere near their building. He was in deep, Jay said, and when he decided to get out by burning everyone who trusted him, they made sure he understood the consequences. Amara stared at her husband's name on a stranger's laptop on a cliff overlooking the sound in the middle of the night. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because it was cleaner to let you be a grieving widow. The police knew. Jay's voice was flat. The syndicate had reached inside the department. They buried it. So the entire time. She couldn't finish the sentence. He made choices, Jay said, and the choices killed him. She held the counter with both hands. The betrayal came in waves. Not just Jay now. Darius, too. Their whole marriage. Had she ever known who she was sharing a life with? Did you know? When you ordered it, did you know what he was? Jay met her eyes without flinching. Yes, but that doesn't make it right. No, his voice went quieter. It doesn't. She stepped toward him. One step, then another until there was almost nothing between them. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He reached up, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with the gentleness that had undone her from the beginning. Because I was afraid you would look at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now. How am I looking at you? His voice dropped into something raw, like you're deciding, like you're still deciding. She was. She knew it. Weighing the lies Darius had kept against the brutal truth Jay had finally given her. Weighing the grief and the want and the danger and the fact that none of this looked anything like the life she'd planned. She should go. Should put an ocean between herself and this man and his world. But she didn't want to. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss, not soft or careful or tentative. It was 3 years of loneliness and 1 week of betrayal and something that had been building since she first saw him standing calm in the middle of a fight he'd already decided. He kissed her back the way people kiss things they expect to lose. When she finally pulled away, both of them breathing hard, she said, "I'm staying," and meant it. They didn't need words after that. He lifted her carefully, the way people handle things they've learned to value late, and therefore more than they thought possible, and carried her through the house to the room overlooking the water. Moonlight came in, wide and silver. No more stopping, no more careful distance. Just his hands learning her, and her hands tracing the old scars on his chest, and whispered things neither of them would be able to hold to in daylight. He moved slowly, with a reverence that contradicted everything she knew about who he was, like she was the first delicate thing he had ever been trusted with. When he said her name in the dark, broken open, somewhere between need and prayer, Amara understood she had already given him everything that mattered. There was no version of this she could walk back. When it was over, they lay quiet, her head on his chest, his fingers drawing slow patterns on her shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked. His hand stilled. "Now we figure out how to keep you safe." She lifted her head. "You said they'd stop caring about me." His jaw tightened. "I lied." She sat up. "Why?" "Because I needed you here." His voice was raw with it. "And I knew that if you understood how much danger you were actually in, you would run." "Jay," he cupped her face. "I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever." She should have been furious. She felt something that embarrassed her in its closeness to relief. "So what do? We leave Seattle." His voice went steady, decisive. "Leave the country if that's what it takes. I have the resources. I have the contacts. Your organization." His jaw tightened. "They'll survive." "Can you actually walk away from it? They don't get a vote." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed and the colour left his face. "What is it?" He looked at her, and for the second time that night she saw real fear in him. "They know we're here." The lights died. Total darkness. Jay was already moving, already pulling her up. "Get dressed now." His voice was controlled and quiet, and she trusted it immediately. 30 seconds. Her hands shook as she found her clothes in the dark. Jay was dressed before she finished, already at the door, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Stay behind me. Don't make a sound. She looked toward the windows and saw them. Shadows crossing the property. 6 at least. Maybe more. Organized. Professional. Fast. The front door gave way with a sound like a gunshot. Jay pulled her into the hallway toward the back of the house, toward the balcony stairs carved into the cliff face. They ran. Her lungs burned. The steps were steep, and the dark swallowed everything more than 2 feet ahead of her. Behind them, shouts in Korean. Then gunfire. The concrete beside her ear chipped. "Don't look back," Jay said. She didn't. They hit the tree line and he pulled her through it, branches and roots and complete darkness, moving like he had memorized the terrain in daylight specifically for this possibility. 3 minutes, maybe less. They broke through to a strip of access road and she saw the car, black, engine running, hidden under netting she would never have noticed from any angle. "Get in." She threw herself into the passenger seat. He was behind the wheel before the door closed and the tires were already screaming on gravel. No headlights, just moonlight and his hands on the wheel and the road opening up in front of them at speed. She watched him drive. And this was the full truth of who he was. Not the patient man at the corner table with his history books and his careful gestures. Not the man who touched her face like she was something he was afraid to damage. This was the man who ran Korean organized crime in Seattle and made grown men bow in the street. And she was not afraid of him. She was completely, embarrassingly alive. Where are we going? To end it. His voice was final in a way she believed absolutely. She reached across the console and touched his arm. He glanced at her for just a second, and the softness came back, small and real. "I won't let them hurt you." "I know," she said. And she did. 20 minutes south, back toward the city, into streets she didn't recognize, until he pulled in front of a warehouse that looked abandoned and wasn't. He turned off the engine. "Stay in the car." "No, Jay." She held his hand with both of hers. "You said we'd figure this out together. So let's do it together." He looked at her for a long moment, reading her face for doubt. He didn't find any. "Stay behind me," he said. "Don't speak until I tell you to." They got out into cold air that smelled like the docks. He knocked at the side entrance. Twice. A pause. Once more. The door opened. Inside, dim light and open space and one man standing in the center beside 2 chairs. The man who had come to her apartment, who had handed her the folder, who had looked at her with something that might have been pity. He clapped once, slowly, as they walked in. His eyes moved to Amara and something moved through them. "How romantic." "You brought her." Jay's voice came out flat and cold. "This ends tonight, Minjun." Minjun smiled. "Does it?" He circled them slowly, every step deliberate, expensive shoes clicking against concrete. "You've made quite a mess, Jay." He stopped. "Fell in love with the widow of the man you had killed. That's either poetic or the most self-destructive thing you've ever done." "I haven't decided." "Let her go," Jay said. "This is between you and me." Minjun laughed. "It's too late for that." He stopped in front of Amara and looked at her with that dissecting attention. "The moment you became something to him, you became a problem. She's not involved. She's the center of it." Minjun's eyes narrowed. "You were supposed to be unmovable. That was the entire point of you. But here you are, willing to burn down everything you built for a woman." Amara was tired of being the weight on a scale that other people were tipping. She stepped forward. Jay grabbed her arm. She pulled free. "Then deal with me," she said. Both men stared at her. "You think I make him weak," she said, looking at Minjun directly. "That I'm the liability in this. You're wrong. He's stronger for it." Minjun raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" She looked at Jay. "Tell him." Jay stepped forward to stand beside her. His voice dropped to something low and final. "She's mine. Anyone who wants to reach her answers to me first." The warehouse went completely silent. Minjun looked between them for a long time. Then the performance left his face and something almost genuine replaced it. You actually love her. Jay didn't hesitate. More than anything I've ever had. Minjun exhaled, looked down, then holstered the gun Amara hadn't even known he was holding. You realize this makes you impossible to work with. Let them try to use her against me. Minjun shook his head, something between resignation and respect moving across his face. I hope you mean that. He walked toward the exit, paused at the door. This makes you vulnerable in ways you can't predict. Remember I told you that. He pushed through the door and was gone. Amara's knees nearly went before Jay caught her. He held her up with both hands, steady and present, and she exhaled everything she'd been holding since the lights went out on that cliff. It's over, he said quietly. Is it? For now? They walked out of the warehouse hand in hand, into the first thin light of dawn breaking over Seattle. The water was going gold and pink and the city was just beginning to wake up, completely indifferent to what the night had held. Amara stopped on the sidewalk and turned to face him. What now? Jay pulled her in close, his arms wrapping around her like something settled, like something decided. Now we live, he said. Together, whatever that looks like. She smiled, the first real smile in what felt like a very long time. He kissed her slow and certain, not desperate like the cliff house, not angry like the kitchen counter. This was a promise made in daylight with witnesses. She knew this wasn't the end of danger. Knew there would be more nights and more running and more choices that looked impossible until she made them. But she also knew this. She would rather have one dangerous real year with this man than 100 safe years with no one. Darius was gone. The truth about him was painful and messy, and she would carry it for a long time. But Jay, this impossible love, this reckless grace, this was hers. She had chosen it with her eyes open, and she was not letting go. They drove back through the waking city together, and for the first time in 3 years, Amara wasn't running away from anything. She was running towards something. Whatever came next, she was ready. Thank you for staying until the end of this story right here on City of Tales. If this one moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because new stories drop every week and you do not want to walk in halfway through. Until next time, love hard, choose brave, and never stop believing that broken people can still find something beautiful.